Okay, I assume that'll start. All right, we'll call the meeting to order. Karen, would you take the roll call, please?
Doug?
Here.
Karen?
Here.
John?
Here.
Jerry?
Here.
Kathy?
Here.
Very good. And we've got the agenda for tonight. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll second.
Doug?
Aye.
Karen?
Karen, aye.
John, aye.
Jerry, aye.
Kathy, aye.
Okay, so the first item on the agenda is the consent agenda, including minutes from the January 14th regular meeting, minutes from the January 9th work session, minutes from the December 4th PCC Board of Directors meeting, quick stop liquor license, bills, and the consent vote.
I'll make a motion for the consent agenda.
Doug, aye. Karen, aye.
John, aye.
Jerry, aye.
Kathy, aye.
All right. Next item on the agenda is 2 mayoral appointments, the first of which is the Mayor Pro Tem. Jerry has been the Mayor Pro Tem for how long?
A year and a half.
So about a year and a half, and you've got to exercise that a little more than most. So thank you very much for your service with that. As we move forward, I would like to appoint John Kraft to the Mayor Pro Tem going forward, if you're willing.
Absolutely, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And the other appointment on here yet today, is there, we don't need anything on that, right, Karen?
Pardon?
We don't need anything specific on that, just the appointment?
Just announce who you're going to appoint. If you would do that.
Okay, so for the Mayor Pro Tem, I am appointing John Kraft. And then the other appointment is the E91 Committee representative, has been Ray Stephen. I talked with him last night, and he's willing to continue doing that. So we will still appoint Ray Stephen as the E911 Committee representative. So the next agenda item is on the under the administration category, and we've got Heidi and Michael here from Northland Security to give us a presentation.
Thank you very much. My name is Heidi Poole. I'll step a little bit closer so I can be in the recording. My name is Heidi Poole. I am with Northland Securities. I have with me here tonight my colleague Michael Hart. For those of you who have been on the council for a while, you have seen Jeff Heil, also who's worked with the city for many years. May see a combination of all three of us as we do work as a team at Northland. We believe that when more than one mind is looking at something, we come up with the best solutions for our clients. A little bit about Northland is we're a full service broker dealer, meaning that we buy and sell bonds in the market every day, and then Michael, Jeff, and I, and we have one other colleague in Iowa, we all work with public finance, so we provide advice and analysis for municipal clients. So tonight, what I wanted to do, about in November, Whitney had given us a call and thought it was a good idea to update the council on where the city stands with its debt outstanding. Give an update on that. Talk a little bit about how debt you get the authority to, how it's legal, and talk about what types of capacities a city like Peosta has going forward. A growing city such as yourself is always going to be looking to have improvements in your streets, and it's good to have a plan in place of how you're going to pay for those issues and having that the minimal impact onto your taxpayers. So we'll go through that in a little bit of detail. Is there anything specifically in the presentation tonight that I can answer for you guys so I can be prepared for anything? get into it. Do feel free to answer any questions as I'm going through this information. I'm happy to stop and answer all this. So it's a lot of numbers, so a lot of times when it's the first time you're going through it, feel free to stop me and I'll go through it. If there's one thing tonight I want you guys to take away is when you're thinking about your capital improvements, and at this point we're looking generally at some issues here, and a couple issues in the next 3 to 5 years. How are you going to pay for it, and what are those capabilities? One thing I want you to look for and listen for in this presentation too. So go ahead and just kind of start a little bit more into the details. There's this, you see in front of you, there are some papers, and there's a booklet that says the City of Peosta Debt Book. If you open up to page 2, there's some historical data in there that shows your 100% valuation and your taxable valuation history. The City of Peosta has had a large amount of growth throughout the last decade. From fiscal 2009 to 21, your 100% valuation growth has been an average of 5.89%. And then your taxable valuation, which is the valuation after the rollbacks have taken place, is average 5.31%. If you're looking at the average throughout the state of Iowa, you're seeing just under that 3%. So, as a growing city, there's some things that we'll take into account when making those projections. We'll look at your growth and take those into account as we look at the projects that you have going forward.
So you're saying we're growing at 5.89 on average, whereas the Iowa average is about 3.
Correct.
Okay.
The city has 4 general obligation debts outstanding right now. General obligation debts are the debts that are backed by the full taxes of the city. When you issue this type of debt, there are legal steps and constraints that you have to meet. For every city, every county, you have to look at what is called debt capacity. And on page 3, I'm looking at that capacity. It's 5% of your 100% valuation is what you can have outstanding. So if you look at the left-hand column, you'll see the fiscal year, your actual valuation, and then 5% of that. So you're looking at your legal debt limit for fiscal 2021 is just over $12 million. I do have a conservative assumed valuation growth of 3%, just for the analysis purposes. We use conservative numbers, and we'll use that throughout this presentation. After you see that legal debt limit, you see these numbers for the general obligations that you issued in 17, 15, 13, and 12. What those numbers represent is the principal outstanding for those payments. So you'll see that the 2017 falls off in 2028, the 15 in 2024, and 13, 2025, and then you have the 12 that'll be paid off yet this year. So what this shows, also, what it shows is how much capacity you have. When we look at cities and they say, well, what percentage of debt capacity should we have? It's really just a legal step. There are some cities that have growth, and need to put money into their infrastructure to keep up with that growth, and there's the rural cities that have no growth, negative growth. This debt capacity, I guess what I'm saying is the debt capacity doesn't necessarily mean that you have the ability to pay or not. It's a legal step that you take when issuing debt. So if if you look at what's outstanding today, you're at about 28.54%. When we look at it as a rule of thumb, we start taking a look at things when it hits about 75%. So you're well below that mark when you start taking a look at those capacities.
I'll just add in one thing there, that most cities that are growing at the rate that you are tend to have a lot more debt than you have. So in terms of your peer cities that are growing at 5, 6, 7, 8%, you're definitely a low indebted city, which is a good spot to be. What Heidi's going to talk about in a second is that gives you a lot of opportunities to potentially address things that you want to address in the city, and from an affordability standpoint, you've got a lot of capacity.
So where would you say our peers are at? If we're at 24 or 28%?
The reality of this is that growth creates things that need to be done too. I mean, infrastructure, other types of services that need to be provided. And so a lot of cities that get into that 5% and above growth are more likely to be in that 60 to 80% zone in terms of debt capacity on a pretty regular basis. And there's some cities that even push up, and there's ways you can go above and beyond your debt capacity. Some of them, we have clients that are very fast growing, that they're constantly above 100%, and it's the only way that they can provide the infrastructure needed that's from growth. And so some of that's, what kind of demands you have from developers, what kind of growth you're having. But you just in general, if you look at your overall profile, you're in a good position to be thinking about, okay, what's the right path forward? You're definitely not, especially look at how quickly your debt's paying off. Overall, you've got lots of ability to move forward and address the things that you think need to be addressed.
So that's one of the first things that we look at is does the city have capacity for the general obligation debt? And the answer is yes. You'll see there's one other column here that just has, for planning purposes, if you had additional debt, for instance, a $3 million issuance and another $3 million issuance. Based on some of the conversations we've had lately, you're starting to get some of those projects and ideas together. So this is just a placeholder to kind of see what that might look like in the future and how the capacities that you have will pay for that. The next page is a picture of that debt capacity. This shows with those two placeholders, even with those additional $6 million in the next 5 years, this blue area is the capacity with that 3% growth, and the red area would be the debt outstanding. The next page is that general obligation debt that you have outstanding. The next question is you have the legal capacity. How does the city pay for each of those debts? There's different buckets that the debt can be paid from. Some of these debts have sewer infrastructure, water infrastructure. Even though they're backed by the general obligation debt, some of your sewer and water funds are paying for that. What are some of the other areas that we look at? Sometimes we look at local option sales tax. I know that a lot of those dollars go for the police department. There's also what is your TIF dollar availability and what is the debt service availability. So those are the things that we look at. We also look at the road use as well. So if you look at what you've got outstanding, you've got your a portion of it is paid by sewer, a portion of it is paid by water, and then you have some dollars on the debt service levy. The next page, page 6, basically goes through, if you're going to issue more debt, where are those buckets going to look for? what Whitney had kind of tasked us with is, what are your TIF dollar capacities, and what is your debt service capacities? I looked at your debt service for the next 15 years. I looked at the 2020 budget, and if you kept the debt service levy the same at that 1.366 per thousand, the same with that 3% growth, you would be able to keep the debt service levy the same for the next 15 years and fund $3.3 million in principal and interest payments. So that's the capacity that you could do without raising a debt service levy and assuming that conservative 3% growth. So that's one of the buckets that we would look at. Now the next thing that we looked at is, what can we use some of TIF dollars that, what TIF dollars are available? So, to kind of give a little overview on what is TIF, when you set up an urban renewal area, you can freeze the value, and any of that additional value that comes in can be used for TIF dollars, can be used for economic development projects. So we looked at what urban renewal areas have been set up in the past, and what is that availability going forward. You have about 6 different areas where we looked at where you've amended your plans. You have some of your areas where you have residential areas, but your original area that you set up in 1989 has a large amount of that TIF value and TIF dollars. So I focused on that area because for 2020, the total TIF dollars available was 1.9 million each year. What you are requesting each year or taking each year is about 300,000. So there's a lot of capacity from that. I'm not recommending that you use 1.9 million in TIF dollars every single year, but that's the capacity that's outstanding. About 1.7 million of that is from that original area. Previous councils have put in place a self-imposed sunset of those dollars for 2035. So I'm looking at what's that type of availability, and I have it kind of summarized on this first page here. If you maximize that total TIF through 2035, it's $25 million. So it's definitely something we would look at when funding these types of projects. Now, one thing to talk about when using TIF that is already going back to the other taxing bodies, it's going to the 810 levy, it's going to the school, it's going to the county. When you certify TIF that's already been going to those taxing authorities, there's an impact. So the general fund won't be taking those dollars anymore. So there is an impact when you do have additional TIF dollars. Using your last year's rates, for every 100,000 you borrow each year, you'd be impacting the general fund for the city of 34,000. So it's one thing to look at. You can borrow, use those TIF dollars. You won't be adding additional tax. However, the general fund's going to take a hit. So that's why I wouldn't recommend, looking at maximizing that TIF. What we'll look for when the council comes up with projects that they believe need to go forward, we're going to look at these 2 main buckets. We're going to look at that debt service levy, and we're going to look at that TIF, the TIF capacity.
I had a question on the debt service here with projected debt. You have an other column there with 97,000 listed. What is that?
97,000. I believe that is a capital interest credit. Let me pull that up. The pages behind there have the individual debt service payments, which show which buckets those come from.
Yeah, criteria when the levy is in place and when you borrow. If you borrow after you've already certified your budget, you can't put the levy in place. And so the first year you borrow to pay the first interest payment because you have that in there. So that's we just put in there hypothetical, it would even itself out.
So interest payment basically is what the other.
Yeah, so like if you borrow funds this summer, but you didn't get in your budget in March, you'd be required to make a payment in the next fiscal year because you have to make an interest payment within a year when you borrow. And you wouldn't have been able to put that into your budget. And so a lot of times what cities do is you have to pay for that from some other source of funds. That's not a debt service levy, probably not TIF because you wouldn't debt certify that. So that's why it's under the other. It could either be you could borrow for those funds, pay them out of general funds, and you'd have to find another place. But that's kind of a more detailed, specific thing that once you get into the specifics of a finance plan related to specific projects, you'd be wanting to think about. So.
And it actually should be irrelevant because as we talked about, I think the timing of our projects that we've come to understand now is going to be pushed back even further than what I talked about in November with the studies that we just signed on for. So some of these projects like the Peosta Street culvert that we thought might be throwing dirt this year are not going to be. So this, when I had those conversations with them, we thought that might be the case that we could be in for 21 issues, but it's not looking like, as we finish up the CIP, it's not looking like that would be the case. So that would not be a concern.
Yeah, that hypothetical is probably another year out. So we just push those hypotheticals, as the city's ready for these projects.
Does the council understand kind of the very basics of what TIF is and how it works? I mean, you understand what I used to.
I'll let you explain it. It's probably good for everybody. Yeah.
I'll just explain a little bit because I heard what Heidi said and I'll kind of fill in some of the gaps going back a little bit. So the way that a TIF area, these were set up in 1989. So they set the frozen base value as of 1988. Okay, so all of the growth and value, which there's been a ton of value, it's been a long time.
And this is the industrial park, obviously.
Okay, thanks.
So all of the growth and value, the city has the option to divert the tax revenues away from the general funds of the city, county, and the school district into the city's TIF fund. Okay, so you're taking it from all of the tax entities, most of the taxes, it's not all of them, but about 80% of them into the TIF fund. And those TIF dollars can be used for projects that the council determines are for the benefit of economic development. Okay, so you can't do any project, but there's a lot of discretion because we all have a different definition of what economic development is. And there's the law or statute doesn't clearly say, this is or this isn't economic development. So you're taking those dollars aside. So the questions you should ask is, okay, so if I'm going to take TIF dollars here, you've got an enormous amount of capacity to do that over the next 15 years. You've got $1.9 million. If you took the full $1.9 million, about a third of that is coming out of your own pocket. So what you'd be doing is you'd be taking about $650,000 out of your general funds and putting in the TIF fund. I'm sure that'll be hard to put a budget together with whatever you have now minus $650,000. Okay, so it's probably not realistic to do that. And if we suggested that, I'm sure that Whitney and Carol would kill us. So you have to understand that. But the question you should ask is, well, would the school and the county feel the same way if we did that? And if I'm just taking it from this bucket, put it in this bucket, why do I really care? What's the advantage to it? When you look at the overall consolidated tax rate, because it's the same taxpayer paying the city, the county, and the school district. You're not different people or different homeowners paying those. The tax rate will be lowest when you use TIF compared to using just a property tax levy. And that's because of the way the school tax formula works. And actually the state is backfilling a lot of those dollars through the way that the school formula works. And so it is a lower tax way to do things. And it makes your tax rate stay relatively the same. It might affect the school and the county a little bit based upon the decisions they make. And of course you can't tell them what to do in terms of their own budgets and decision making. But it is a really powerful tool for you to use to get a lot of project done with a lesser or more minimal tax impact, as long as those projects are couched in the definition of economic development. There's a lot more to TIF than that, but I think for the purposes tonight, I mean, what Heidi's done hard work to identify here for you in your plan is that you have an enormous amount of capacity to use this tool to the extent that you identify projects that are good economic development projects and that we're comfortable raising the TIF asking for the city.
And I just want to add briefly so you guys can back me up. We do have some of our TIF obligations are falling off here very quickly. So we absolutely want to take advantage of those because those we can capture without negatively impacting our general fund and the school and the county because none of those sources have received those yet. So right when they fall off of their current TIF deal, if we can pick them up with another project, nobody is, basically any the wiser. It's never hit our general fund. The school and the county have not received it also. So that's a complete golden opportunity with essentially zero drawbacks. In addition to some other outstanding payments, but.
So when you say ones that are falling off, Whitney, which ones are you referring to?
So like Bodine Electric, well, I'll let them go on.
Flip to page 7.
Yep, I'm there.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you have, right here, what is showing is a cash flow of your current TIF obligations. If you look at the line for fiscal 2021, you'll see that there's the rebate agreements for Bodine, Berry Plastic, Fairway, Penske, and then a couple Penske, and then there's an Industrial Drive amount. So you'll see the total amount of TIF asked for this year is $307,000. You'll see that those payments are dropping off fairly quickly. So there's additional availability. If you look at this right side, that's the surplus if you just continue to ask for, just over that $300,000.
So the key would be to time projects with TIF for these when they drop off, right?
That's coming, that says 22, but it's coming faster than you think. In order to, you certify TIF for fiscal 22 by December 1st of 2020. So by the December 1st of the year we're in now, you have to have a debt obligation ready to certify. That could be an internal loan, it could be a bond issue, it could be many different things, but it looks further away on this chart than it is in reality.
2 years.
Well, I mean, you'd have to have something in place this December, because then you send that to the county. When the county does their valuations, they set aside the value for you for fiscal 22. So it's in the budget process, the very first thing that happens is the TIF certification. And so for the fiscal year you're budgeting for in that process right now, you would have done that last fall. This is $307,000 asking.
So far I'm hearing there's two sources of revenue, two sources of money, of funds, that we maybe haven't used as much as other communities like us would have used. One of them is debt, where we're going to borrow it and have to pay it back. And the other one is TIF funds, where that's cash on an annual basis, but it's not debt.
The one thing I didn't explain is that in order to access TIF funds, the process works that you have to, step one, and this is a very abbreviated version of it.
It's a good place to start.
Step one is that you create an urban renewal plan. And you amend that urban renewal plan to include the projects that you want. The plan was originally created in 1989. You could continue to amend that plan. You have to identify specifically, here's what we want to do, and here's approximately how much it's going to cost. Step two is you have to incur some kind of debt obligation. It could be a bond issue, it could be a rebate agreement like you have, it could be an internal loan like you have in there. And then before December 1st, you say to the county, this city has this obligation that we need to receive TIF funds to pay back. You don't use TIF funds to pay for projects, you don't use TIF fund, and you only use TIF funds. You don't use them to pay for projects, you only use them to pay back debt obligations, and you're only eligible to receive TIF funds to the extent that you have debt to pay.
Okay.
So we're talking about two different buckets of money, but really the financing, it's kind of how you started with the general obligation. It's probably one bond issue that's paid, and that's shown here partially from debt service levy and partially from TIF. So it could be split up between the two, but it's the same financing vehicle.
So no matter which way we go, it's incurring a debt and then just using the TIF funds to help pay that debt off. So it doesn't have to increase our tax rate. So the concepts sink in. As you talk about the TIF, there's 1.9 available. It sounds like 0 is not a good place to be. 1.9 is not a good place to be. How do you determine where we ought to target ourselves?
Well, you have to have the projects, and you shouldn't, just have 600,000 to have 600,000.
Yeah.
You have to have viable projects for economic development, and it can kind of. I think where we want to go today is not find that exact number where your TIF is, but look to combine the two, debt service levy and TIF, to fit the needs of this CIP that you're putting together.
So,
I was just going to say, so in a perfect world, she's exactly right. You guys have been going through a process for 3 months now, sorting through projects, identifying priorities, and I've encouraged you to kind of, crush the money aside as you start to trip yourself up. Can we even, no. You guys set the vision and the priorities, and then it's their job and my job to then bring you a plan. We need these things for growth, for these purposes, and then we can present you with different options of how that can be funded. Okay, we can do it this way, this has no impact on the taxpayer. This way has a marginal impact on the taxpayer. So, and I think you guys have done a really good job of that. As I get this information from them, the CIP is really coming together. So I think you guys have identified some really hard and fast projects that range from, updates to this building, to stormwater, to roads. We have the whole sewer lines, we have the whole bevy. And I guess from where I'm standing with my communication with Dorsey, I think every project on our list is TIF eligible.
but to kind of go to Jim's question though, would it be in our best interest to be around our surplus, right? For the rest of the TIF. So in 2022, we'd be at 145,000, just get as close to that to utilize that TIF that we have in surplus, right? To keep that at 307,000 or around there. Is that
We're going to need to use more than that if we want to get our projects done.
But kind of a minimum basis, and I think our goal tonight was to give you a little better picture of what you've got to kind of keep the ball rolling, keep the momentum on what you've been doing with the CIP, and know that, look, we've got a lot of things, what tools we can use to approach this, and as you craft and get to a more narrowly defined, here's what we want to do. That's part of the reason you have a city administrator now. You have capacity to spend a little more time thinking about this stuff, is to get it, and then we'll come back with a plan, maybe plans A, B, and C. If you want to get all this done, or maybe you narrow some, but hopefully you can get some questions as a picture. Look, there's a lot of tools here. We have the capacity to do this. We're not wasting our time talking about these projects. There is a realistic ability to get some stuff done.
So if I can wrap my head around this 145 mark, the 219, so on and so forth, if we stay around with these projects, if we were to stay around that number, that's going to have the least amount of effect on our budget.
Correct. No.
Right, because that's what we're dealing with right now. Okay.
And even the additional TIF that they're talking about that will impact the general fund. Those numbers are solid, but they're correct, but those will also be offset by the 5% growth that our general fund also always sees. So when they say negative 34,000, it's by the time the next you know, it's unfortunately not as black and white as, well, throw this tip in place, then we just negative column this. It really, and like I said, it's the cheapest way to finance projects. So, and that's where you guys can sort through projects. Like, if this is have to have, if this project has to happen, that Highway 20 lift station, second line, we can do it with sewer revenue, but we're going to pay twice the interest. So that has to be passed on to the ratepayers, or we can, utilize TIF dollars in which, well, if the state back to the school, we'll adjust for our general fund, and so that's, you have options. There are some impacts, but this is, and I'm sure they can attest better than I can in the grand scheme of ways to get projects done here. This is a very, very beneficial. This is a happy presentation for them as opposed to some other.
How many towns do you get to give this kind of a message to?
Not very many, but the one thing that I'll say is that the council, before you set up the TIF area for this industrial park, where there is this limit of 2035, it's self-imposed. I spoke with your bond council. There is abilities if the council would want to take that self-imposement away, because of when you set up that original plan prior to 1995, that frozen base could have essentially no end date. And that's some further discussions that you could have a further date, but I wanted to kind of reiterate what councils have done before you to set you up in a very good financial position for the future. So it's a very good thing. Whitney did touch on another source of revenue. You have your water and your sewer revenues. I was here in the spring and talked about the sewer increases for the sewer project. I didn't focus on those revenue sources tonight as ways to fund the CIP, because when you're looking to fund each of these projects with a revenue source, you have to have the rates in place to fund those. So, looking at where your water and sewer are, with the sewer increases going in place, the debt service levy and the TIF funds would have less of an impact on the citizens at this point. What we do look to do is have the water fund projects fund themselves and the sewer projects fund themselves. You can pay them back with debt service levy or with TIF as well, but I guess what I want to reiterate is when I'm looking at some of these projects, without having to have increases, I want to look at what funds without having to have increases in rates or in taxes, as the first buckets to look at.
Did we accomplish what we talked about?
Absolutely. Do you guys have any questions? I can't speak highly enough about these guys. They've been just an excellent resource to me throughout my entire career, not just here. So they are very helpful, and if you have any questions, now's the time. I mean, I contacted them really right after our first CIP meeting, so I didn't have nearly as much information and refinement as I have now on the projects, but I mean, this means really good things for our city. So, because we have this large increment, there will be some impact. I think everybody can capture some of that, but sort of on the year to recapture it is going to be the painful one, but then it continues to be part of that increment that's immediately assessed there when the auditor sends out those valuations. So, do you guys work with Asbury?
We've done some.
Yeah, I mean, there are communities that, obviously, like we talked about, they just keep capturing that increment, always, as much as they can. And eventually, everybody benefits. It will all hit the tax roll someday, so I'm just thankful you guys were able to put this together so quickly, and I really appreciate it. I hope you guys found it as helpful as I did, and thank you very much.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think tell me if I'm getting the message right. We've got a big CIP plan. We got a lot of improvement projects that we've worked through. We've got them prioritized, and we've had trouble pulling the trigger on some because we see the dollar value associated with it, and every dollar spent is a dollar spent. So we're reluctant, right? And that's how it is with personal finance. But here with municipal financing, that's not necessarily the case. That we ought to, maybe as a council, look at what projects are lined up and think a little bit more openly about what we'd like to do by when, and then let you run the numbers and tell us, here's what the impact of that would be.
Yeah, I think you're saying it exactly right. And I guess my experience in this business, we get the advantage of seeing lots of different councils make lots of different decisions, right? There's no one right answer. It's more, you're tasked by your citizens to make the answer that you think is most appropriate for your community. But the thing that you see is that I think over time, there is kind of a right level of investment that you ought to be making in your community. In the cities that, I'm not trying to make the case that you can borrow too much, but the cities that forego making the investments that are really necessary over time, oftentimes are the ones that swing from being a very low debt. You're not very low debt, you have some, but if you let that all the way run to zero, you're probably going to be in a position as a city where you're going to go all the way to this other end of the spectrum at some point in time. And the cities that manage themselves their best stay somewhere in the middle, and they're always maybe a little bit uncomfortable, but they never get themselves too far out in front of things, because over time it becomes an issue of fairness, and we all have a different definition of fairness, right? But if you make the right level of investment over time, and you continue to provide the right level of service, you give the people in your seats the flexibility to make decisions for the problems that they're addressing. But it's also a fairness of the taxpayers who are here today are different than the ones that are going to be here in 20 years. And are you paying your fair share? You don't need to pay more, than your fair share. But and that's kind of what you got to grapple with. What's your fair share to keep up with the community that you want it to be? And I think that's a more productive way to think about it than, because Heidi and I are self-aware that we're dead people and we're necessary evil. But you have to, so debt isn't a good thing in of itself. Nobody wants a mortgage, but people want a home to live in. So what kind of place are you in community, and what level of investment does it take over time to make it that way? And I think if you keep your mind in that place, it's a little more productive in terms of making decisions when you get down to the hard final answers on the CFP.
That helped me a lot. Yes. Doug, Karen, anything else? Any questions?
Well, thank you.
Jerry, Kathy, you guys good for now?
Very helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. We got a lot to think about.
Any questions, concerns, please let us know. We're happy to help. And I know there's a lot of numbers tonight, a lot of things to think over. So if something comes up in the next couple of weeks as you're thinking it through and need to talk it through again, we're happy to. So,
Great, thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, next on the agenda is a couple of resolutions, or a resolution here and then an ordinance. So, resolution adopting a supplement to the Peosta Code of Ordinances.
This just updates the code
Thank you, Karen.
for all the ordinances that were adopted after we codified in 2019.
Sewer consequence. I'll make a motion to adopt the resolution of a supplement to the Peosta Code of Ordinances.
Second that. Doug, aye.
Karen,
Karen, I.
John, I.
Jerry, aye.
Kathy, aye. What number was that, please?
it's number 5.
Okay, and the last agenda item prior to citizen comment is an ordinance amending Title VI, Chapter 5 of the Peosta Municipal Code, changing the water reactivation fee from $25 to $75. Understanding that this is for, this is the reactivation fee associated with reactivating when it's terminated due to non-payment. So there's a couple motions with this. We'll have a motion first to approve the first reading of this change, and then we'll have another, well, that's the first one. Do we have a motion to approve the first reading?
I'll make the motion.
A second.
And a roll call vote, please.
Doug, aye.
Karen, I.
John, I.
Jerry, aye.
Kathy,
And then following on that, should we choose to, we can have a motion to suspend the statutory rule requiring this same ordinance to be considered and voted on for passage at 2 council meetings prior to the meeting at which it's finally passed.
I'll make a motion to waive the second and third readings.
A second.
Doug, aye.
Karen, I.
John, I.
Jerry, aye.
Kathy, aye.
And then the last order of business on this is you guys have an easier way to read this than I do, don't you? Changing the reactivation fee.
Motion to adopt.
Oh, it's just the adoption. Yep, thank you. Need a motion to adopt.
I'll make,
I'll make that motion to adopt.
I'll second that. Doug, aye.
Karen, I.
John, I.
Jerry, aye.
Kathy, aye.
Okay, any other comments or topics for under the administration category? If not, we'll move to citizen comment. It's open mic night. Anybody got anything to add? How well could you hear that conversation?
Not real well.
You can hear it, yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
not personal.
She was trying to get to the recording, and he can't believe they did a great job. So, given our circumstance, perhaps a microphone or something might be in order. The voting that we had at one time.
I know we kind of talked about it last meeting. Are we kind of working on?
Yeah, we're pulling numbers together, we just thought vendors are trying to get some quotes ready, so, yeah.
The wheels are in motion to get microphones and also get some kind of a video display so you can see what we see. Now, for those that are here, this information is online. It's posted on the Thursday before the meeting. You just need to go and get it ahead of time. Friday, sorry. Thank you. Were you going to add something else?
I have a different comment. Reactivation fee going, and I don't know what it takes to reactivate, so that's going to be my question in a second. But if we come across a situation where one of our citizens cannot pay their water and we have to shut it off, they obviously have a story. And then they come back and say they want to turn back on, and we want to charge them more money because they didn't have enough to pay.
The reactivation fees to cover the time that we have in it.
That's my question, Jerry. What does it take to, and I don't need the details, this is just a consideration for you folks. What does it take to rehook it up? And what comes to mind is if you call a TV service or call a phone service, they press a button while they're talking to you.
It all depends on whether or not they can find that water shut off or not. I think
Yeah.
Dean was kind of the proponent for this.
Yeah, like I said, I'm not questioning it. I'm just proposing an interrogatory to look at it again.
But I think though there's if it's a case of a hardship case, they can come to us,
Yeah.
plead their case. so to speak,
Right.
and say, hey, look, this is the deal, then we have the liberty of waiving that.
Yeah,
But
that's my story, John, about everyone's got, or my comment,
Right.
everyone's got a story. Again, I'm not asking you for that detail. It just comes to mind, an old comedian that once said, yeah, you go to a bank, you have an overdraft, and they want to charge you more money just because you didn't have enough anyway.
Right.
You know, that kind of a comment. I'm done.
No,
Just a
That's
consideration.
legitimate.
And 75 right? Yes. Dean will know.
And there's also, you know, if there's a hardship case, you know, they come to the city, we could also point them in the right direction to get funding available and help them out make those payments.
I don't have the history with this. I don't know if either of you do. I think Kelly has that information,
Well,
but
it's
historically.
never a goal to shut anyone.
Yeah, no, see, we've already taken this into too much dialogue. I just want to talk to the end there, Craig, you're right.
No, and
I'm
I
just
think
saying.
in my 20 years, we've probably only shut off a handful, and it's not for those, you know, lack of,
They aren't hardship.
they're not hardship cases.
Okay.
They're sometimes disorganized.
And again, I'm out of it now. I just wanted it to be a thought.
It was a question that came up, and we had the same concern. This shouldn't be something that's punitive to somebody who's already struggling. I think the intent of this is to make it more punitive for those that don't give it the attention it should get.
Understood.
Great point. Anything else?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Do you need a roll call on adjournment?
Doug, aye.
Karen,
John, I.
Kathy,
Motion or meeting adjourned.